Guten Erev Shabbos, my holy sisters and brothers. How's everybody doing? We're so excited. We're getting ready for Shabbos. We're doing a little learning on a Friday afternoon. That was the Moshav Band doing their song Hallelujah from the Shabbat Volume 1 album that we've been working our way through. And if you recognize the words, that was Psalm 150. Praise Him with song, praise Him with a drum, praise Him with the shofar. Perfect for this time of year. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we get together to do a little learning on a Friday with Shabbos approaching? Yehudit, saying Shabbat Shalom, Nina, Sal, and everyone, wishing you a restful and rejuvenating Shabbos from Florence, South Carolina. Lindsay in Cincinnati, Tom says Shabbat Shalom, Nancy in North Carolina, Bill in mid-Missouri, PK in Colorado, Paul in the Great Northwest, Guy in Dayton, Ohio. Over there on the YouTube side, Marjorie in Georgia, Lynn in North Texas, wishing us a Shabbat Shalom, the first of 5782, the new Hebrew year, 5782. Today's class is sponsored by Isabella Rubin in memory of her husband, Boris Rubin. May Boris's memory always be for a blessing. May our learning today accrue to his merit in the world of souls and help him rise ever higher and a little closer to the throne of the Holy One. Isabella, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings, and we say Amen. And thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people by donating to our nonprofit. Okay. We are holding in Tractate Beitzah. This is the 8th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of festivals. We are on page 10. Today we'll be finishing our discussion of Mishnah number 2, opening and completing our discussion of Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 1, and beginning our discussion of Mishnah number 4. So lots going on here. Let's get right to it. I'll just mention I shared a little quote on the Facebook page today from Shlomo Carlebach. Such a beautiful quote. And I want to get it exactly right. So let me just go to Facebook. Well, that's actually, I shared it, so it's in my images. Okay, and he says, the question is not how much you love each other. The question is how much you love each other when you hate each other. And I sent this out to my personal contacts, and somebody said, I love Shlomo Carlebach, but I'm a little confused. What do you mean? What is he saying? How do I get my head around that? Right? And he's saying, when things are good, it's not so difficult to feel warm and fuzzy toward our loved ones and the people that we're close to. But when we encounter bumps in the road, when things are challenging, especially the people who live in our homes with us, right? And we could get crazy and we get so mad and so angry, often about little stuff, right? It's at that moment that we want to remember how much we love each other and how closely linked we are, and not just let that angry drivel come out of our mouths and be directed at the people that we most care about. When we hate each other is when we have to remember how much we really love each other. And then once we can do that with the people closest to us, be nice if we could even extend that same kind of feeling to the stranger who angers us, with online at the supermarket. let's remember, you know what? We're neighbors. We live in the same community. We probably have a lot more in common than we think. Let me just limit my own angry emotions and focus on what we might have in common. And perhaps we already love each other and we just don't know it yet. All right, let's get to this. All right, so we're finishing our discussion of Mishnah number 2. And Mishnah number 2 was, as we discussed yesterday, about carrying a ladder on a festival from one dovecote to another, or from the house out to the dovecote. And we saw that Beis Hillel is more lenient in this regard than Beis Shammai are. And that was a reversal from the first Mishnah, where Beis Shammai, who are normally more stringent, but allow us to eat this egg that was laid on the festival, Beis Hillel prohibit, and the law follows Beis Hillel in this, like it does in most things. But then the Mishnah goes and presents other cases where, as usual, Beis Hillel is more lenient. Okay, but so is that a contradiction where Beis Hillel was more stringent with regard to the laws of a festival in that first Mishnah? Now they're more lenient. Is there something wrong here? And then what the Gemara will do is show, well, no, Beis Hillel is being consistent with their line of reasoning in other matters, and they come out in a more stringent place here, but it makes sense. It's not some kind of a departure from their sort of normal point of view, their normal perspective on these issues. That's kind of the general flow of what we're doing. Okay, so we pick it up, and it says... Okay, so in trying to understand this dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and it seems to be difficult because now Beis Hillel is more lenient, whereas in the first Mishnah they were more stringent. And so it was taught in a different Mishnah, and it's actually a Mishnah that we're going to be coming to in today's discussion. Beis Shammai say, one may not take fledgling doves on a festival unless he shook them as an act of preparation while it was still day. Now, we know that on a festival, you can take an animal that's for eating, and you can slaughter it and roast it and eat it, right? And that's part of rejoicing on the festival, that you're going to have a roast chicken or a roast sheep or some roast beef, or in this case, doves, right? So doves, you know, they've been used as carrier pigeons, okay, and other kinds of things. But in these dovecotes, they were primarily kept for eating. And indeed, today you can still find, pigeon recipes and dove recipes. It is a kosher bird if it's slaughtered properly. And so, what would the issue be? Why can't you just take the dove? Because you might also have breeding doves or doves that you keep for other purposes. And so the doves that are not, that you're not raising them to be eaten, those you definitely shouldn't touch on the festival. And what about if you didn't select the doves that you're gonna slaughter and eat on the festival before the festival began? So then, just like the egg that was laid during the festival and therefore it wasn't prepared for use on the festival, if you didn't select from among the doves in your dovecote the ones that you want to slaughter and then, cook and eat on the festival, then you shouldn't touch them at all because they're muktzeh. They're set aside and they're not prepared for use on the festival. That's the issue. It's going to get mentioned here as part of resolving this contradiction between the stringencies of Beis Hillel in one case and their leniencies in another. And it's also going to be, we're going to get specific on that particular issue with regard to the dovecote. Here it's just being mentioned like foreshadowing, and then later we're going to actually go into that discussion in the Mishnah. But right now the Gemara says, it was taught in this upcoming Mishnah that Beis Shammai say one may not take fledgling doves on a festival unless he shook them as an act of preparation while it was still day. And Beis Hillel say it is indeed necessary to perform some act of preparation to permit the taking of fledglings on a festival, but this does not have to be done by shaking them. Rather, it is enough if one stands the day before and says, I will take this dove and I will take that one. In other words, he prepared them for use on the festival by selecting the doves that he's going to slaughter and then cook and eat on the festival. I confess, I didn't look in my art scroll. I did a quick Google search. I didn't find it. I'm not sure what shaking fledgling doves means. If somebody with more experience in farm matters understands that, please put it in the comments. Does shaking mean actually killing them? I mean, you can't kill them because they have to be slaughtered properly, which is, done with a knife across the throat, etc. So I'm not sure what shaking means, but it's in some manner that prepares them for use. Maybe what it means is like you're shaking them to just to see how big they are and are they ready to be eaten? Are they too young to be good for eating? By shaking them, maybe you're determining whether they're big enough or not. I'm not sure what that means, but somehow shaking is a manner of specifying that, yeah, these are ready and I'm going to use these doves tomorrow. But Beis Hillel say you don't need to do that. It's enough to just make a verbal declaration. These are the doves that I'm going to use during the festival. You need to do that before the festival so that they're prepared for use on the festival. So apparently, but Beis Shammai say you have to shake. It's not enough to make the verbal designation. So apparently, with regard to rejoicing on the festival, the opinion of Beis Shammai is stringent and that of Beis Hillel is lenient. And the Gemara raises a contradiction, as above, with regard to one who slaughters an undomesticated animal or fowl on a festival. Beis Shammai are lenient and allow one to dig with a shovel to cover the blood due to the joy of the festival, whereas Beis Hillel do not permit one to slaughter it at all unless there was a shovel ready from the day before. Right? So this was the issue we covered yesterday and the day before. That was in the first Mishnah. That if it's an undomesticated animal or a bird that you're going to be slaughtering on the festival, you have to have loose earth prepared because it's part of the mitzvah of slaughtering that kind of animal, either an undomesticated kosher mammal or a bird, that after you slaughter it and its blood falls on the ground, you need to cover that up. That's a Torah obligation. And you can't be digging that dirt out of the ground. So Beis Hillel say you cannot slaughter that animal if you don't already have loose earth prepared. Beis Shammai permit it, and then you can dig up that dirt. And so in that sense, in that first Mishnah, that was one of the three examples of Beis Shammai being more lenient. Now here in this case of the doves, Beis Hillel are more lenient, and the Gemara is bringing this up as a contradiction. Why is Beis Hillel more lenient in one case and Beis Shammai more lenient in the other? And it was and then Rabbi Yochanan said, oh, well, reverse the opinions. Maybe you misunderstood, and Beis Shammai should remain the more lenient one, and perhaps it's Beis Shammai who say the verbal designation is enough, and Beis Hillel who say you have to shake them. But the Gemara challenges this explanation and says perhaps that is not so, and a different explanation is possible. Beis Shammai only state their lenient opinion that it is permitted to cover the blood when you slaughter the undomesticated animal or the fowl on the festival, where there was already a shovel stuck in the ground, so that when you just remove the shovel from the ground, some dirt will come with it, and you can use that to cover the blood. However, where there is no embedded shovel, perhaps even Beis Shammai would agree that it is not permitted to use that dirt. Alternatively, it is possible that Beis Hillel say their opinion only here, since a dove is muktzeh, which is prohibited by rabbinic law. Something that's not set aside or prepared is prohibited by rabbinic law. And therefore, when he stands and says, I will take this and that, making that verbal declaration, it is enough, and he doesn't need a physical action of shaking the bird to select it, to prepare it for use on the festival, since what is being overcome is not a Torah prohibition on using that dove, but rather a rabbinic prohibition. The whole concept of muktzeh, that something should not be touched if it's not prepared for use on the festival, that's a rabbinic declaration. And when in cases of rabbinic law, the standards are going to be more lenient, and in cases of uncertainty, we don't even apply the ordinance. So here, the verbal designation should be enough. Then the Gemara gives several more examples where it seems like Beis Shammai is more stringent, Beis Hillel is more lenient, that this is a contradiction of their positions in the first Mishnah. And then the Gemara explains, but it's not necessarily that Beis Hillel is generally more lenient or more stringent. It's just the particular details of this case require them to be consistent with their rulings elsewhere, and they end up in a more stringent position. But there's no contradiction, and we don't have to go to this kind of crazy extreme that Rabbi Yochanan would would go to and say that these Mishnahs have been corrupted and that we should reverse the attributions and say that no, Beis Shammai is always going to be more stringent with regard to laws of a festival, and Beis Shammai is going to be more lenient and Beis Hillel is going to be more stringent. That is not what it is. Sometimes they go one way, sometimes they go the other, depending on the details of the case in question. And since we're not going to go through each of those examples, because time does not permit, we're now going to go to Mishnah number 3 of chapter 1. We're about halfway down the A side of page 10. Mishnah number 3. And this is this Mishnah. Beis Shammai say, one may not take fledgling doves from a dovecote on a festival unless he shook the ones he wished to take while it was still day, meaning the day before the festival, thereby preparing them for use on the festival. And Beis Hillel say it is not necessary to shake, rather it is sufficient if one stands the day before and makes the verbal declaration, I will take this fledgling and I will take that one. And before I even go to the Gemara, I'll just say what the law is in this. The halacha ended up like this. The doves of a dovecote and a loft are considered muktzeh. They are set aside from use and you can't even touch them on the festival or Shabbos for that matter. And the same applies to birds nesting in rafters and the like. One must designate them the day before the festival in order to use them on the festival. How do you designate them? By saying, I will take this one or that one. In other words, the verbal declaration required by Beis Hillel, that is the law. They won this argument over Beis Shammai. In addition, one must either leave a sign on them or remember a distinguishing feature. One may do so even by means of a non-verbal declaration, but it is not necessary to shake them. He could point, but he doesn't have to shake them. However, it is not enough to merely say, I will take a pair of doves from this dovecote, and all of these laws are in accordance with the opinion of Beis Hillel. So Beis Hillel is going to win this argument. Now let's proceed to the Gemara. Rav Hanan bar Ami said, the dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel applies to the first brood, meaning the first pair of fledglings hatched in the first month of the year from a pair of doves. And those fledglings are usually left in the nest and they are not used for food. As Beis Shammai hold, we issue a decree prohibiting taking them, as perhaps on the festival he will come to reconsider after handling them and decide to leave them in their place, in which case he has moved them unnecessarily. However, once he has already shaken them, there is no further concern that he might change his mind on the festival itself. And Beis Hillel hold, we do not issue a decree, as there is no concern that one might change his mind, and therefore a verbal commitment is sufficient. However, with regard to the second brood, the fledglings born on the second cycle of the following month, everyone agrees that it is enough for one to stand and say, I will take this one and that one. So what we're learning is, so when people were raising doves, and doves are having babies all year long, right? So there's going to be fledglings, and they're going to be suitable to eat for food. And generally, the reason that you're breeding these doves is so that you can eat them. So from the second brood on, as long as you made some kind of a selection before the festival started, that's going to be enough. And Beis Shammai agree with Beis Hillel that the verbal designation is enough. But with regard to the first brood, where the default position is that they're not there for eating, most people will leave those aside and let them, I guess, become another breeding pair themselves. It would be unusual to use them for food. And so there, according to Beis Shammai, you need a more significant designation, which they call shaking. But Beis Hillel still say the verbal designation is enough. And the Gemara asks, and according to the opinion of Beis Hillel, one does not need to say, I will take this one and that one. Let him say, from here, this dovecote I will take tomorrow. Why does one have to specify exactly which fledglings he plans to remove from the dovecote? We already said that that's where the law ends up. But the Gemara is saying, why isn't that enough? Why does he have to specify those two birds? Why not say, I'm going to take two birds from that dovecote? And if you say that Beis Hillel do not accept the principle of retroactive designation, i.e. they reject the idea that a person's original intention can be clarified retroactively, and therefore it cannot be said that the fledglings one takes on the festival were the ones he had in mind beforehand. But didn't we learn in a Mishnah? So now the Gemara is going to give another example of another area of law where Beis Hillel does seem to hold by retroactive designation. Now, if you've been learning with us for a while, you're familiar with this concept, this idea that separation has to be made, for example, with tithes, right? You can't eat untithed produce or drink untithed wine until the tithes have been removed. The tithe for the priests, the tithe for the Levites, the tithe for the poor in certain years. Until you separate those tithes, you can't drink that wine, for example. But let's say he didn't tithe before Shabbos began. Now it's Shabbos, he wants to celebrate. Can he say, I'm going to leave enough wine in this barrel so that there's going to be enough for the tithes that I'll separate out after Shabbos? And at that point, it will be like as if I designated this amount of this particular wine, not just the amount of wine, but the wine that's left over. It's as if I separated that before. That's retroactive designation, right? It will be clarified when I finally do take it that this is what I meant to take before. And some of the sages don't hold by retroactive designation. They say you can't do that. If you didn't tithe it before, you can't do it now, because tithing is not permitted on Shabbos. That's the point. You can't separate one thing from another on Shabbos. That's one of the prohibited labors. Sorting, separating is a prohibited labor on Shabbos and festivals. But if you could sort it afterwards, then it was like as if you did it before. But some sages don't hold by this concept of retroactive designation. So the question before us right now is, do Beis Hillel hold by retroactive designation or not? If they would allow you to say, I'm going to just take 2 birds from that dovecote. They didn't pick which birds, so they didn't say which birds are now prepared for use on the festival. It's not all of them, because for sure you're not going to take all the birds. But what you're saying is, well, if I just say I'm going to take 2 birds from that dovecote, and then the next day during the festival I take 2, okay, well, those are the 2 that I intended to take when I said I'm going to take 2 birds from that dovecote. But it's a retroactive designation. If you don't hold by retroactive designation, you can't do that. So now the Gemara is going to say, okay, well, there's this other area of law where Beis Hillel do seem to hold by retroactive designation. And this area is going to be when a person dies in a house. So when a person dies within a house or in a building, right? We've seen this before. This is called impurity of the tent, corpse impurity in a tent, right? So the Torah says that if a person dies inside a tent, okay, well, everything that is in that tent, meaning sharing the same roof is over this human corpse, and all the other objects that are in that tent, and the people who might be in there, all of them are going to be rendered tameh, ritually impure, because they were under the same roof with that corpse. So that's the issue. Now, not only is everything inside the tent or inside a house going to be rendered impure, but the entrances of the house, the doorways, the actual archways that are doorways to that house, anything which is in those archways is going to be rendered impure, but only if that is the planned route by which you're going to remove the corpse from the house, right? Now, if you haven't selected which doorway you're going to use to remove the corpse from the house, then all of the doorways are considered to be impure, and anything that is in that doorway at the time, any vessel, is going to be rendered impure because of it. But if you select one of the doorways, then the other doorways remain pure, and any vessels or utensils that are found in those doorways will also remain pure. So this is the general area, and we're going to see how this touches upon the issue of retroactive designation. So, didn't we learn in a Mishnah, Ohalot 7:3, If a corpse is located in a house and the house has many entrances, whether they are open or closed, not only is the inside of the house ritually impure as a tent of the dead, but all the entrances are likewise ritually impure and impart impurity to the vessels they contain. And the reason is that the corpse might be removed via any of the entrances, and therefore they all contract impurity. If only one of the entrances was open after the person died, that entrance alone is ritually impure, as the corpse will certainly be removed through it, and all the other entrances remain ritually pure. And the same applies if one decided from the outset to remove the corpse through one of the entrances, or to carry it out through a window that has a minimum size of 4x4 handbreadths. That's large enough for a corpse. And this intention spares all the other entrances from ritual impurity, and therefore any vessels which are found underneath those archways, as it is clear that the corpse will not be removed through them. Now, with regard to this case, Beis Shammai say this law applies only if one had decided to remove the corpse by a particular entrance before the person died, before it became a corpse in that house, so that the entrance through which the body would be removed was already determined at the time of death. And Beis Hillel say this law applies even after the person died, as the principle of retroactive designation is invoked, which means that the entrance through which the deceased will be removed is retroactively designated. And this indicates that Beis Hillel do accept the principle of retroactive designation. So since they accept the principle of retroactive designation, why shouldn't they also accept for us to say, oh, tomorrow during the festival, I'm going to take 2 fledgling doves from that dovecote. I'm not saying which ones, but when I pick 2 tomorrow, then it will be retroactively determined that those were the 2 I meant when I said I'm going to take 2 from that dovecote. Since Beis Hillel do seem to hold by retroactive designation, it should work that they could make that more generalized statement. But the Gemara refutes this proof. Wasn't it stated by Amoraim, sages of the Mishnah, of the Talmud, of the Gemara, with regard to this Mishnah, that Rabbah said, in this case, Beis Hillel referred only to purifying the entrances from that point forward. In other words, after one has decided on an entrance that he will use to remove the dead, any vessels in the space of the other entrances do not become ritually impure. However, vessels that were located inside the space of those other entrances before the decision was made to pick one of them by which path to remove the corpse, they do remain impure. Right? Vessels that were in those other entrances became tameh, became ritually impure, because you hadn't made a designation yet. According to these Amoraim, these sages of the Gemara, Beis Hillel do not accept the principle of retroactive designation. And so too, Rav Oshaya said, the law is referring to purifying the entrances from that point forward, which indicates from here onward, yes, the entrances are ritually pure. Retroactively, no, they are not considered that they were pure before. And Rava said there is actually a different way to resolve these conflicting rulings of Beis Hillel. Actually, in the case of ritual impurity, Beis Hillel maintained that all the entrances are ritually pure retroactively, so they definitely hold by retroactive designation. But here, with regard to fledglings, this is the reason why Beis Hillel insists that one designate a particular pair of fledglings that he plans to take on the festival. Why? Not because what they do or do not believe in retroactive designation, but because there's a different policy issue in place. For perhaps one will move fledglings and put them down again, move them and put them down again until he finds the pair that he wants, right? He says, I'm going to take 2 from the dovecote tomorrow during the festival. Then during the festival, he goes in there. Now, only 2 of those birds are available to be taken, slaughtered, cooked, and eaten during the festival. But what he might do is say, well, I want to take the best 2. Is it these? No, this one's a little light. Is it this one? Nah, it doesn't look a little healthy. Is it this one? Yeah, this is the one I'm going to take. But when he picked them up, sort of doing the touch test, like we pick our avocados in the supermarket, he violated the prohibition on touching muktzeh items, because the ones that aren't going to be taken, he shouldn't have touched them at all. And to protect the person from doing that, Beis Hillel say you have to specify 2 fledglings, or however many you're going to cook, but you have to specify those in advance before the festival. You can't lift and place and touch and experiment to see which ones you want. And that's why you can't say, I'm going to take 2 from that dovecote tomorrow. That's insufficient. You have to go in the dovecote before the festival, point to the ones that you want to take the next day and say, this is the one I'm going to take and eat tomorrow. This is the one I'm going to take and eat tomorrow. And they have to have some identifying marks so that you can remember which ones you selected when the next day comes. Now, the Gemara raises an objection, but if this is indeed the concern, didn't you say that it is enough if one stands and says, I will take this one and that one? So in this case, too, he does not touch them. It is therefore possible that he may reconsider his choice of fledglings on the festival after he handles them. And the Gemara answers, this applies only when one made his choice on the eve of the festival, meaning before the festival, since he knows that he may not alter his decision on the festival itself. Even if he does not like the ones he chose, he definitively decided to take these fledglings and he will not handle others. However, on the festival, it is prohibited, as sometimes, right, why can't you make your selection on the festival? As sometimes those that seem to him to be fat ones will be found to be thin, and the thin ones will be found to be fat, and he will move an object that is not suitable for him, thereby transgressing the prohibition against moving muktzeh objects. Alternatively, sometimes they will all be found to be thin, and he will leave them all, and he will come to neglect the rejoicing of the festival. If, however, one announces the day before, I will take this one and I will take that one, he will indeed take only those fledglings, thereby enhancing his joy of the festival. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Now we go to Mishnah number 4. If on the eve of a festival, one designated black fledgling doves to be slaughtered, and on the following day, he found white ones in the dovecote rather than the birds that he had designated, or if one designated white ones to be slaughtered and he found black ones, or if one designated 2 fledglings to be slaughtered and he found 3. In all these cases, they are prohibited, as these are not the same fledglings that he designated earlier. If, however, one designated 3 to be slaughtered and he found only 2, they are permitted, as it is presumed that one of the fledglings escaped. If one designated them inside the nest, and the next day he cannot find them there, and he found fledglings before the nest, in front of the nest, they are prohibited, as they might be the fledglings from another nest, other than the ones that he selected and left inside the nest. But if there are only those fledglings in the immediate vicinity, they are permitted, as it can be assumed that these are the ones he designated inside the nest, right? So they gave various cases, but the principle is clear. You have to, before the festival starts, you have to say, these are the ones I'm gonna take and slaughter and cook and eat on the festival. If you can't identify which ones you picked, and there's other doves there, you can't take those other doves. You can only take the ones that for sure you identified. And if the color changes, or they're not in the position where you left them, and there's no other identifying marks so that you can't be sure they're the ones you designated, then you can't take any of them. Even though this will mean that you're gonna not be able to rejoice on the festival as you planned by having, those doves to eat. Now, Abaye said, with regard to a related issue, we are dealing with fledglings located on a ledge, a flat piece of wood protruding from the dovecote around which many doves congregate. So here too, the Mishnah is referring to a ledge. Since other doves are regularly found there, the principle that one follows the majority, I skipped a little and I probably shouldn't. Okay, so the Gemara opens like this. The Gemara asks, but it is obvious that if one designated black ones to be slaughtered and found white ones, that they are not the same birds. And Rabbah said, what are we dealing with here? The Mishnah is referring, why does it need to say that if you designated black ones and then you found white ones, you can't take them? Isn't that obvious? Why does the Mishnah need to say that? So Rabbah said, what are we dealing with here? The Mishnah is referring to a case where one designated both black and white ones to be slaughtered, and he rose up and found black ones in the place where the white ones had been, and white ones in the place of the black ones. Now, lest you say, well, these are the same fledglings, and they simply exchange places, the Mishnah teaches us that this claim is not accepted. Instead, it is assumed that these ones that he designated have gone to the outside world, and these ones that he found are others that have come from elsewhere. In other words, if he can't be sure that these are the ones he designated, then he can't take them, right? It's not that the simplest, most logical explanation works. If there's a possibility that these are not the ones he designated, he's not going to be able to take any of them. And the Gemara suggests, let us say that this Mishnah supports Rabbi Hanina. As Rabbi Hanina said, when resolving an uncertainty with regard to the identity of an item, if the majority indicates one ruling, but the item in question is near to a source that indicates otherwise, one follows the majority. In this case, the majority of the fledglings are prohibited as they were not designated for use on the festival. Consequently, the found fledglings are prohibited despite the fact that the nearest fledglings are the designated ones. Now, the Gemara refutes this suggestion, and this is what Abaye said with regard to a different issue. We're dealing with fledglings located on a ledge, which is a flat piece of wood protruding from the dovecote, around which many doves congregate. Here too, the Mishnah is referring to a ledge. Since other doves are regularly found there, the principle that one follows the majority rather than the proximate source does not apply, as both the majority of doves and the proximate source of doves are not the original ones, and therefore all the fledglings are prohibited. Now, the Mishnah taught that if one designated 2 and he found 3, they are prohibited, because somehow a new dove arrived here. So why are we to assume that only one new dove arrived? Perhaps 2 new doves arrived. Perhaps 3 new doves arrived. And the ones that I selected yesterday have all left. We have no way of knowing. If one was able to get in, because there were only 2 here yesterday, and now there's 3, we have no way of knowing how many are actually new ones unless we had the identifying features. And here we don't. So whichever way you look at this matter, the fledglings are prohibited. If these are others, they are others that have not been designated, so you can't take them. And if they are not others, i.e. if 2 of the fledglings that one designated are still there, nevertheless, there is one that he certainly did not designate, and it is mingled with them, and this renders the others prohibited as well. I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, please get them in. The Gemara suggests, let us say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and not the opinion of the rabbis, as it is taught in a Beitzah. If one placed 100 dinars of tithe money in a safe place, and he found 200 there, it is assumed that this is non-sacred money, and second tithe money mingle together. Someone must have come and added another 100 to his tithe money. Therefore, he separates one. I think 100, the word is missing. Therefore, he separates 100 dinars from the total, and he states, whatever part of this is the tithe is fine. Whatever part of it is non-tithe money, let it be used to redeem the tithe money, and this should be sanctified as tithe money in its place. Recall that tithed money acquires sanctity, right? When you set aside part of your produce or part of your money, right? In the same way that if you are, like we have a Meiser account, right? Anytime we make income, we take 10% of it and put it in a separate bank account. That's designated for charity. That money has sanctity because it's been set aside because God told us to tithe, and now I have separated the tithe in order to, fulfill that commandment from God. So now, if I were to use that money for my own private purposes, very bad. That's a sin. That's an aveira, because that money has sanctity. But what if my tithe money that I've set aside to give to charity becomes, accidentally mingled with non-tithe money? What do I do then? Do I have to set all of this new money aside for charity as well? And now what we're learning is, well, in the case of money mingled with money, it's not going to be that difficult. I know how much money I had in my tithe account, So now that it became mingled with other money, I'm just going to say, okay, the part of this account that is tithe money remains tithe money, and the part that is, came from the other money, which is not tithe, which does not have this sanctity attached to it, I'm going to redeem it with my tithe money, right? And in the end, I'm going to have the same amount that I had set aside to give to charity, and that amount is going to go to charity. And these other coins, which, I've been talking about bank accounts, but if you actually had like a piggy bank and somehow other money went into it, and you knew how much money was in the charity piggy bank, so then you could say, okay, I'm going to make a separation, and whatever was actually not sacred money is going to be redeemed by sacred money and become sacred. Okay, whatever part is fine. And this is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe, who edited the Mishnah. But the rabbis who disagree with Rebbe say it is all non-sacred money. Since the money is not as he left it, the assumption is that someone took the original 100 dinars and he or someone else replaced it with 200 dinars of regular non-sacred money. Conversely, if one placed 200 dinars and found 100 dinars, it is presumed that 100 dinars had been left in its place and is tithe money, and 100 dinars were removed. This is the statement of Rebbe. And the rabbis say it is all non-sacred money. It is assumed that someone removed all the money, and the 100 dinars that he found must have been placed there by someone else and is not connected to the money he left. And the law with regard to the case of fledglings apparently follows Rebbe's opinion in the case of second tithe money. What is the law about this money? If one left 100 dinars of second tithe money, second tithe, that's money that he can use for himself when he goes to Jerusalem, or in certain years, it's set aside for the poor. Depending on which year in the Shemitah cycle you are. We've just entered a Shemitah year when in the land of Israel, if we were, living under Torah law strictly, the farmers would not farm this year. Every seventh year, they let the land rest, and that shows tremendous faith in God that he gave you enough food in the sixth year and that enough food will come in the eighth year, and you don't need to do any farming, let the land rest in the seventh year. But there's that 7-year cycle. In years 1 and 2 and 4 and 5, the second tithe money is for yourself to go up to Jerusalem on the festivals and enjoy your time there. And in the 3rd and 6th years, that money is set aside for the widow and the orphan, etc. Now, if one left 100 dinars as second tithe money and he found 200 in its place, or if one left 200 dinars and discovered 100, all the money is non-sacred. The halacha is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis in their dispute with Rebbe. And finally, the Gemara refutes this claim. Even if you say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, it can be explained, as it was stated with regard to this Mishnah, that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar both say fledglings are different than money, since they typically hop from place to place. Therefore, it is possible that one of them escaped. By contrast, a money pouch cannot move of its own accord, and it must have been taken by someone. If I know I put 100 there and now I find 200, or I put 200 there and now I find 100, someone came here and took money, replaced money, changed money, something happened. But birds can move on their own, and so the law comes out differently. All right, that's what I've got today. Let's go to comments and questions. Load. There we go. Steve Ribbich. Perhaps the shaking denotes a mindfulness the day before as opposed to a spur of the moment on the day of the festival. I mean, definitely what the shaking does is it's a physical action that selects the bird. I was actually just wondering if shaking is actually part of the process, of taking a dove before you slaughter it. But if all it really means is making a clear selection, okay, this is the animal this is the bird that I'm going to take and slaughter, cook, and eat on the festival. Great, then that really makes sense. All it means is it was a physical, visual action as opposed to a verbal declaration. Sharon says, I would think shaking a small bird would result in internal damage that would render them unkosher. Right, that you certainly can't kill the animal because you have to slaughter it properly. And if you damage it in such a way that you've like really injured it, and it might die of its injury, that would render it a treifa. Exactly. And then it's off limits. It's no longer a kosher animal. So the shaking has to be pretty gentle. You can't be hurting the bird with this shaking. And perhaps this verb that they're using, really just denotes waving or lifting or moving. I'm not sure. Hannah, how do you purify a whole house? Great question. When we get to the tractate on Ohalot, is that? I can't remember if that's a tractate in the Gemara or only in the Mishnah. There are some tractates that only exist in the Mishnah. For example, Avos, right? Normally called Pirkei Avos, the sayings of the fathers. That is a tractate of the Mishnah, but it's not found in a standard, Babylonian Talmud because it has no Gemara. And there are other tractates like that that are only Mishnahs and don't have a Gemara. I just can't remember if Ohalot is one of the small tractates or not. It's definitely not one of the big ones. But in any case, we're going to come to that anyway in other cases. But how do you render objects pure that were made impure? First of all, this is only really relevant when the temple is standing. Right now, when the temple has been destroyed and we don't have a red heifer and we don't have a way to purify people who become impure with corpse tuma, it's assumed that the whole world is impure. All of us are ritually impure. Even, if we were to immerse in a mikveh, which is part of the purification process, to immerse in the living waters of a ritual bath, it would not be enough because when you touch a corpse or when you walk over a grave, you contract corpse tuma. That means you can't enter the grounds of the Holy Temple when the temple is standing until you go through the whole purification process, which takes 7 days. And it includes on the third and seventh day, you are going to be sprinkled with the waters of the red heifer, meaning a red heifer, a perfectly red cow that was slaughtered and burned in the proper manner on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. And then those ashes were collected. Some of it was mixed with water, and then some of that water was taken with a special branch of hyssop, and it was sprinkled on you. Until that happens, you can't be purified. So we're all in a state of impurity. But when the temple is standing, you have to be careful about this stuff. I don't know exactly what happens to all the objects inside the house. Some objects can be purified. Things that are metal, things that go through a fire in order to be made can be purified. But for instance, clay vessels can never be purified. Earthenware vessels cannot be purified. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal to deal with the impurity of a tent. So I'm not sure exactly how all that gets dealt with. I can't remember the whole body of law. Hopefully they're not making people, get rid of all their possessions that were in the house because a person happened to die in the tent. That would be a terrible policy decision because then people, would be tempted to, somebody's on their sick bed about to die and they take them outside so they don't, render all the vessels impure. So there's a lot more to that area of law and I'm just not, I haven't researched it recently. I'm not ready to talk about it. Paula, cannot these doves be either put aside or tagged? Yes, that's the idea. You should have to put that, and I think we're going to be talking more about that tomorrow, on tomorrow's page 11 after Shabbos, tomorrow night. You have to designate them in a way that you know which birds you selected because there's no other birds around, because you remember the particular markings. Before the festival starts, could you tie a string around one of their feet? I think, why not? Sure, that should work. So that kind of a thing, yes. And Tom, finally, one wonders, since both the Mishnah and the Gemara were compiled hundreds of years after Jews had presumably been living according to the Torah, how much of this retrospective lawmaking was kind of retroactive and how much of it was kind of guessing how people really lived? I think maybe what you're saying is, they'd already been living a Torah life, and now they're sort of looking for the derivations in scripture that had not, really been clarified before. We definitely find some of that. And you'll even see some of the sages will say, well, go out and see what the people are doing because the people already have been living this way. And that is the law. Very rare where people have been doing a kind of activity for hundreds of years. Now the sages are going to come and say, you know what? We have to change everything. From now on, it's going to be different. That's rare. But there were also it happened, but it's rare. There were novel situations that came up. But also, so much had to be done after the second temple was destroyed, right? Because Jews were certainly living a Torah lifestyle while the temples were standing, but so much of Jewish practice was built around making the pilgrimages to the temple 3 times a year, bringing offerings, bringing sacrifices. If you transgressed and you came to be liable for a sin offering, you'd have to wait till the next time you went up to Jerusalem to bring your sin offering. You were liable to bring a sin offering, etc. And once the temple was destroyed and it wasn't going to be rebuilt, after the first temple was destroyed, there were still prophets around, and I think they knew that eventually it would be rebuilt. But when that second temple was destroyed, there were no more prophets. Prophecy had ended near the beginning of the second temple period. So they had no one telling them that, don't worry, the temple will be rebuilt, in our time. Who knows how long it's going to take? It's been 2,000 years. It could happen any day when Mashiach comes, but it hasn't in 2,000 years. So that's why, initially under the leadership of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, they adjusted Judaism quite a bit so that, the prayer services replaced the sacrifices in the temple, and a lot of other laws needed to be clarified as well. That's what I've got for us today. May you be blessed with such a sweet Shabbos. May it be restful and rejuvenating, like Yehudit always says. And may it really be sweet for you. The first Shabbos of our new year. This is Shabbos Shuvah. So we're really in these 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we're thinking about teshuvah, atonement, but really, one of the most important parts of that is thinking about how we can align our will with the will of the Holy One. And I wish you much success in that venture. Good Shabbos.